A very good afternoon to all. Hello, I am Dr. Divyata Hingwala. I am the pediatric neuroradiologist here at SRCC Children's Hospital, Mumbai. Today I will be talking on ultrasound of the skull and transcranial Doppler. In this presentation, I will be briefly covering the indications for doing ultrasound and transcranial Doppler of the skull, techniques for doing the scan, the normal ultrasound anatomy and the structures that are visualized, and the spectrum of pathological imaging findings that we should be familiar with. So which are the conditions that we will typically see and identify on ultrasound of the skull? We can identify intracranial hemorrhage, whether it is intraparenchymal, intraventricular. We can identify hydrocephalus or increase in size of the ventricles. Ultrasound is very versatile. We can do repeated follow-ups without any radiation exposure. So it is very at the bedside of the patient. So it is a very convenient technique for both these conditions. Also very useful for identification of periventricular leukomalacia in patients with suspected HIE. Also in identification of certain gross congenital malformations or vascular abnormalities. So which are the patients in whom we will consider that we would like to do ultrasound of the skull? We will typically do it in preterm neonates. Generally, all preterm neonates born before 30 weeks should undergo ultrasound of the skull as a rule. Once within 7 to 10 days of the of birth, as well as once at around 36 to 40 weeks of gestation. Any patient with abnormal increase in head circumference or any suspected anomaly picked up on prenatal ultrasound, or any patient with hypothermia or patients on ECMO or any other support machines should undergo ultrasound of the skull. Apart from that, patients with other CNS symptoms like seizures or any other suspected CNS disorders should also undergo ultrasound skull as maybe as an initial screening modality, and we can scale it up to CT or MRI as and when available and possible. So ultrasound of the skull is typically performed using sound waves. We all know that from the previous session that we have attended. So for the sound waves to penetrate, we need an acoustic window. In neonates, in whom we are typically doing the ultrasound scan, this is the anterior fontanelle which is used for performing the scan, and in this gives a very good view of the skull. As the child grows bigger, maybe after the age of 1 month or 1.5 months, the fontanelle will start shrinking in size, and the sound and the window that we have, acoustic window that we have, will reduce in size. Apart from the anterior fontanelle, other windows like the posterior fontanelle, the mastoid fontanelle, the temporal fontanelle can also be used for performing the for performing the scan to evaluate the specific structures, maybe of the posterior fossa, etc. The transducers that are typically used are the ones with smaller footprints. So here we have a microconvex probe, which is a phased array probe, which fits very well on the small anterior fontanelle on the neonate. For high resolution images and detailed evaluation of the superficial structures, we can also use the linear probe. If these probes are not available in routine practice, we are having a dedicated pediatric setup, so we are having these small footprint probes. However, if these probes are not available, we can also use the transvaginal probe. What is not to be used is this large convex probe that we typically use for ultrasound abdomen, because that will have very limited penetration and it has a very limited field of view. What is important is, one, before we do the scan, any prior imaging studies have to be reviewed. We need to know the history and the indication why we are doing the scan. Very important. In addition, minimum disturbance of the patient, minimum moving of the patient, minimum pressure on the anterior fontanelle, especially in the sick preterm neonate, is to be used. When we are performing the scan, also we need to be aware of the age of the neonate. If the neonate is very preterm, the brain has not matured fully, the sulci are not fully developed, myelination is not complete. The brain appears smoother and it can be mistaken for lissencephaly, which is a mistake we should not be making. Up to the age of 24 weeks, the sulci are relatively smooth and which is a very normal variant. In addition, because the myelination is not complete, the brain will look very hypoechoic, and it can be mistaken, and the sulci can look abnormally bright. Again, this should not be mistaken for a pathology. When we are performing the coronal scan, the image will look like it is oriented in this form, and we place the transducer on the anterior fontanelle and first angulate it anteriorly. This is the representative sagittal image in which I am showing that we first angulate it anteriorly, and then we obtain typically 6 to 8 sections, one through the frontal lobe, then through the frontal horns, the foramen of Monro, through the body of the lateral ventricle, through the trigones of the lateral ventricle and the choroid plexus, and then the last section through the parieto-occipital lobes. Here we are going from anterior, this is the anterior end of the patient, to the posterior. And then we turn the transducer by 90 degrees to obtain a sagittal image that is oriented like this. And in the sagittal plane, we first obtain a mid-sagittal image, and then we obtain 3 parasagittal images on either side. One is the extreme parasagittal image through the sylvian fissure and then through the insula and through the lateral ventricles and the choroid plexus. Before we start acquiring the images, this is a very basic thing I'm talking about, but it is important to check the orientation of the patient and the orientation of the image and the side of the probe related to the side of the patient. A very simple way of checking this is we apply jelly on the probe and then we move the probe on the anterior fontanelle and see how the image is moving. So the right side of the probe should correspond to the right side of the patient. And when we are performing ultrasound of the skull, the right side of the patient is always oriented on the left side of the screen. So this is the right side of the patient always in all radiological images, whether it is ultrasound, X-ray, CT or MRI. Here we are specifically talking about ultrasound. And because ultrasound is a very dynamic process, sometimes you can make a mistake in labeling right and left. If there is any asymmetric findings, for example, bleed on the right or left side, we wouldn't want to mislabel the images. Hence, I'm stressing on image orientation and checking the side of the probe relative to the side of the patient before starting the scan. So here I'll talk about the normal anatomy of the coronal images. Again, I will repeat, this is the right and this is the left on the coronal scans. So here we have the first few sections. Here we have the frontal lobes, the frontal horns of the lateral ventricles, and then we have the interhemispheric fissure. Make sure that it is oriented in the midline and there is no midline shift. Then we have the basal ganglia. The cavum septum pellucidum can be incidentally seen. I'll show a better image. Then above the lateral ventricles is the corpus callosum. These are the temporal lobes, the sylvian fissures and the region of the insula. Here we have the body of the lateral ventricles, the choroid plexus, and then finally we have the parieto-occipital lobes. This is the sagittal plane. In the sagittal plane, the anterior portion of the image is always oriented on the left side of the screen. So this is the mid-sagittal image. Here we are seeing the corpus callosum. Superior to that we see the cingulate gyrus. Here we see the lateral ventricle. Below that is the third ventricle and the aqueduct. Then we have the brainstem and the cerebellum. And then we see in the far parasagittal image, we see the sylvian fissure in the region of the insula. Okay, this ends this section of the normal anatomy. We will discuss the imaging findings of a few pathologies. So when we are seeing preterm neonates, what we are concerned is, are there any signs of HIE, hypoxic ischemic insult? So we see this periventricular flare which appears hyperintense. When we see the hyperintensity, we can also mistake it. Is it there on the contralateral side? The rest of the brain parenchyma also has hyperechogenic foci. So what is real and what is not? There are two main pointers that we should look for. One, is it well defined or ill defined? If it is well defined, as if we can draw a line around this lesion, then it is probably pathologic periventricular flare. Also, compare the echogenicity of this lesion with the echogenicity of the choroid plexus. This is more echogenic. that is whiter than the choroid plexus, and this suggests that this is pathological HIE. Then we have germinal matrix hemorrhage, which is again commonly seen in preterm neonates. So it can it can vary from grade 1, which is mild germinal matrix hemorrhage, to increasing severity with hydrocephalus in grade 3 and extension to the adjacent brain parenchyma in grade 4. I will show examples of each of these grades. So here we have mild germinal matrix hemorrhage. This occurs at the region of the caudothalamic groove near the foramen of Monro. So here we have mild germinal matrix hemorrhage, and there is really not much mass effect or dilatation of the fourth ventricle. This is slightly more severe with grade 2 germinal matrix hemorrhage, type 2 germinal matrix hemorrhage. Then type 3, in which the lateral ventricles are grossly dilated with hemorrhage at the hemorrhage at the caudothalamic groove. And in type 4 germinal matrix hemorrhage, it has extended into the adjacent brain parenchyma. We can see all hemorrhage is echogenic. It looks very white. So this is extended into the adjacent brain parenchyma. So we have germinal matrix hemorrhage with, that is intraventricular hemorrhage with adjacent intraparenchymal hemorrhage, which is bright. Now we have to remember that we expect that blood looks, acute hemorrhage is typically echogenic, that appears white on ultrasound. However, not all blood is white. All blood is not white on ultrasound. So here we have a patient with maybe slightly older subacute germinal matrix hemorrhage, and in these preterm neonates, the appearance evolves very fast. So it is not very echogenic. We may mistake it for a mass lesion, but ultrasound was performed and it was confirmed to be hemorrhage only. So all blood is not white. Here we have another patient with intraparenchymal hemorrhage in the frontal lobe. It was thought to be a mass lesion. We put Doppler. It is not vascular. This is an avascular lesion, and it appears hypoechoic, but it was confirmed to be hemorrhage. It is bright on T1 and dark on T2. So this is subacute hemorrhage, which was confirmed on MRI. Hydrocephalus can be easily picked up on ultrasound. It can be mild, or it can vary from mild to moderate to severe. It is graded based on the size. So here this is mild to moderate hydrocephalus with the size about 6 millimeters. So around 5 to 10 millimeters is mild hydrocephalus, in 5 to 10 millimeters of the size of the lateral ventricle, of the size of the frontal horns of the lateral ventricles. Measure on both sides, because sometimes there may be asymmetry. In addition to hydrocephalus, in this patient, cavum septum pellucidum is also seen. So here we have a patient in which the first scan showed some asymmetry of the lateral ventricles. This finding by itself is really not a very worrisome finding. But this child had progressive increase in size of the lateral ventricles, and for progressive increase in size of the head circumference. Hence, progressive ultrasound and hence sequential ultrasound scans were done, which confirmed the presence of hydrocephalus. Another factor I would like to stress is that there might be inter-observer variation. So these scans were done by different sonologists, and we see that how they have been measured in slightly different way. I mean, there is obvious increase in size of the lateral ventricles, there is no question. As far as possible, if the same sonologist is doing this scan using the same technique, it is preferable. Here we have a patient with severe hydrocephalus. The third, as well as the lateral ventricles, are dilated, and the cortical sulci are also effaced. The same patient has again undergone serial scans, and by the same the same person has performed the scan, and we see how the serial scans have helped to monitor the patient. The size was initially 5.6 centimeters, then it increased to 6.3, 6.6, 7.3. It was tapped, and then it again came down to 6.7. So here we see how the size of the lateral ventricle has varied over time. Apart from these routine scans, we can also perform Doppler. which helps us to see the intracranial vasculature. Here we are seeing the circle of Willis. I'll just orient you with the schematic diagram. So this is the ACA A1 segment, A2 segment. This is the MCA M1 segment. Then these are the two PCAs. So when we are performing Doppler, we are placing the transducer here. Any flow that is towards the probe will be red, and any probe that is away from the probe will be blue. Just a very basic factor. And apart from the visual appearance of the flow, we also note the resistivity index, or the RI, that is calculated by measuring the PSV, the peak systolic velocity, and the end diastolic velocity. And our ultrasound machine just gives us the values typically. Now, why is it important? If as the preterm neonate grows, the diastolic flow will increase slowly, and the resistivity index will reduce a little bit from 0.77 in preterm neonates maybe to 0.73 in term neonates. Now, why is it important? Basically, anything above 0.7 can be considered as normal, but if the resistivity, if the patient is having HI, then the diastolic flow will increase and the resistivity index will fall further. Anything less than 0.6 is pathologic. If the patient is having cerebral edema, then the resistivity index will increase. Anything more than 0.9 is again pathologic. So for all practical purposes, between 0.6 and 0.9 is normal. Less than 0.6, think of HI. Less than more than 0.9, think is there any cerebral edema. And this helps to again follow up the patients. So to conclude, ultrasound is a very easily and versatile tool available for evaluating the preterm, the sick preterm, the sick neonates at the bedside in the NICU. No radiation, and hence we can repeat it as often as required. There are innumerable other applications apart from what I have covered. We can also use it to evaluate congenital anomalies, congenital vascular anomalies, Dandy-Walker, Alnott-Chiari, and many others. However, the most important thing to remember is do not miss hydrocephalus, do not miss acute hemorrhage, which is echogenic on ultrasound. Do not miss gross mass lesions that can cause midline shift. Do not miss obvious vascular anomalies like vein of Galen malformations. Recheck the age of the baby. If it is very preterm, the appearance of the brain will differ from the late preterm and the term neonates. And always remember there are inter and intra-observer variations. So as far as possible, the same observer should try to repeat the scan as far as possible. Thank you very much.